Do you remember Islamic State? Do you remember they controlled both Syria and Iraq? Well, they didn't appear there only because they wanted. Their rise was a consequence of the 2003 war. This country used to be ruled by Saddam Hussein, a dictator that was ever afraid of two factions of the army carrying out a coup against him. Despite being open to the foreign investment, Hussein only allowed the entrance of Muslim investors to Iraq. However, under his rule, Iraq didn't have the best economic performance despite its oil exports. America wasn't a big trade partner, and that was fine for Washington as long as Hussein's regime didn't mess up with American interests in Persian Gulf. That was exactly what happened. What really drove the 2003 invasion was that Saddam Hussein decided in the year 2000 that American dollar would no longer be Iraq's reserve currency, but the euro. This was a way to alleviate the effects of sanctions. Fearing that an economically renewed Iraq would try another adventure at the Persian Gulf in any year of the decade, America was hellbent on deposing Saddam Hussein. Only 1 year later, War on Terror began. Despite there was no link between Al-Qaeda and Hussein's regime and no proof of Iraq's nuclear weapons, those were the perfect pretext to get rid of Saddam Hussein. On the other hand, Iraqi use of euro was excellent news for France and Germany because that meant European Union would have a greater financial scope and a promising client. That's the main reason both Paris and Berlin condemned the invasion of the country. American influence could have been successfully consolidated in Iraq if it wasn't for the fact that the reconstruction was a failure, mainly because there wasn't reconstruction at all. All of the Bush administration believed that a major rebuilding effort wasn't necessary, and they ordered American troops to be ready to deal with refugees, but nothing more. Donald Rumsfeld and Bush himself thought that Hussein was the root of all of the Middle East problems, and the priority was to get away from Iraq as soon as possible after his deposal, putting Ahmed Chalabi on power. Basically, America assumed that the Iraqi bureaucracy would remain intact and thus be able to run the country and provide Iraqis with basic services. Also believed that discontented Iraqi soldiers would not join to organized crime. And finally, the very few attempts of reconstruction, which began to fade by 2006 onwards, were led by American enterprises and excluded local Iraqi companies only because they were state-owned. Summing up, because there were no real efforts on reconstruction and the new government was seen as an accomplice of the situation, there was a perfect context for ISIS' rise at mid-2010s.